You know, sometimes the most incredible stories are hiding in plain sight. Take this. At first glance, it just looks like a table of contents from some old history book. But buried in these chapter titles is the entire roadmap to one of the most tragic stories of self-destruction you'll ever hear. So, we're going to walk through how a nation, really at the peak of its power, just tore itself to pieces and basically invited its own destruction.
So that's the big question, right? How does something like this even happen? This whole story, it doesn't start with some foreign army showing up. Nope. It starts with a bitter family feud. It's a really chilling reminder that sometimes the biggest threat, it isn't from the outside, it's from within. So let's go back. Let's trace these cracks all the way to the beginning.
And this is where it all starts, with a fatal invitation. See, long before Roman soldiers were marching on the Holy City, Rome was actually welcomed in, not as a conqueror, but as a referee, if you can believe it. A referee for a family squabble that just spiraled completely out of control.
And here it is, the first crack in the foundation. It all boils down to two brothers, Hyrcanus and Aristobulus. They're both fighting for the throne. And this isn't just some political disagreement, you know? This is a deep, personal family rivalry that creates this huge, devastating power vacuum right at the top. So, let's break this down. You've got Hyrcanus on one side. He's the legitimate heir, but he backs down. And then on the other side, you've got his brother Aristobulus, who's way more ambitious, and he just grabs the crown. And just like that, the entire kingdom is fractured. You've got factions popping up, supporting each brother. The stage is set for a full-blown civil war.
So with the nation completely divided, what do? Well, they make a terrible, fateful decision. They turn to an outside power to fix their inside problem. They actually invite the famous Roman general Pompey to come and be the judge. And you know, it's a timeless lesson, right? When you invite a wolf to settle a fight between sheep, you really can't be surprised when it decides it's hungry.
So Rome's little arbitration leads to the next phase, where they end up installing their own guy as king, Herod. And this guy becomes one of the most infamous figures in history. He's a man known for two things: building magnificent, incredible things, and a terrifying, murderous paranoia.
I mean, this really tells you everything you need to know about Herod's reign. On the one hand, he's this brilliant builder. He's responsible for this massive, gorgeous expansion of the Holy Temple. But on the other hand, my God, his rule is just soaked in blood. He kills anyone he even thinks is a threat. High priests, the old king he replaced, he even murders his own wife Mariamne. He literally built the kingdom on a foundation of pure fear.
And look, this isn't us just interpreting things. It's spelled out right there in the cold, hard text of the chapter title. This brutality, it wasn't some state secret. It was the defining feature of his time as king. And this kind of violence, this instability, it just festers for decades. So after Herod dies, the kingdom he held together with, an iron fist, it just explodes. All that resentment against Rome, all the memories of the Civil War, it all comes together to create the perfect storm for a massive, catastrophic rebellion. You can just see how fast things fall apart here. It starts with general unrest, these tumults. Then you get the rise of the Sicarii. These were literally dagger-wielding assassins who went after anyone they thought was collaborating with Rome. Of course, Roman governors like Florus clamped down with even more brutality against the Yahudim, the people of the kingdom, which just pours gasoline on the fire, until, bam, full-scale war. The nation is now on a direct collision course with the most powerful empire on the planet.
And this is the point of no return. The Emperor Nero in Rome, he's had enough. He basically says, okay, that's it, and he sends in his top general, a guy named Vespasian, who was known for being absolutely ruthless and efficient. His mission was simple: crush this rebellion, for good. The entire weight of the Roman war machine is now coming down on them.
And this all leads us to the final, horrifying climax of the war, the siege of the Holy City, Jerusalem. What happens next is a tragedy that's almost impossible to imagine, and it's driven just as much by the rebels' own infighting as it is by the power of Rome.
So the Roman legions, now led by Vespasian's own son, Titus, they show up at the walls of Jerusalem. But what's happening inside the city? Unbelievably, rival rebel factions are still fighting each other, even with the greatest army in the world setting up camp right outside their door.
So Titus makes this brilliant and absolutely brutal tactical move. He builds a massive wall around the city's existing walls. The goal? Nothing gets in. Nobody gets out. It's a slow, cruel, inescapable death sentence for every single person trapped inside. With the city sealed off, the real enemy isn't the Roman sword anymore. It's starvation. I mean, listen to how the source describes it with this chilling simplicity. The famine consumed the people by whole houses and families together. Hunger became a weapon of war, more powerful than any siege engine, and it turned the entire city into a mass grave.
And then, the greatest catastrophe of all. The temple, the absolute center of their entire spiritual world, is destroyed. And you know the truly tragic part? The historical accounts say the Roman commander Titus didn't actually want it to happen. But in the chaos of that final assault, the holy house is set on fire and it burns to the ground. It was the point of no return. You'd think that would be the end of the story, but it's not. Not quite. There's one last, defiant group of rebels holding out in this incredible, impregnable fortress in the desert. This is the final, haunting chapter of the war, the story of Masada.
So the very last of the rebels, a group of Sicarii, they retreat to this amazing mountain fortress, Masada. And for months, they hold out against a Roman siege. It's this one last symbol of defiance against an empire that has swallowed their entire world.
But eventually, the Romans do breach the walls. And when they finally pour inside, they're met with just an eerie silence. See, facing the choice between death or slavery, the defenders made an unthinkable choice. They submitted to be killed by one another until the last man took his own life. It was a final, horrific act in a war that was defined by tragedy.
And that brings us full circle, doesn't it? When you trace this whole story from a simple family feud to the ashes of a holy city, to the dead silence on top of a desert fortress, it leaves you with this really big, timeless question. How fragile is any nation really? And when it gets consumed by its own divisions, is its destruction from the outside just inevitable?